So tonight, I'm going to take a look at Azure Container Apps. It was announced in November at Ignite, I believe was the conference name. So it's new. It's still in preview, so it's not fully baked. Keep that in mind as we go through some of the demos. So putting this talk together, I've made some assumptions about who would attend this talk since it's a preview product, so people can't use it in production yet. So I just kind of putting together, targeting this audience. I'm assuming you already know what a container is, because I'm definitely not going to have a chance to get into it with this talk. And I'm assuming you're looking to work with, whether you have yourself or clients or what have you, the type of workloads of a web application, a web API, microservices, or you have some sort of a background process that gets kicked off from a cron job or event-driven logic of some sort, or maybe it's just always running in the background. Which, after I put this list together, I realized that actually covers most logic that you you could write as a developer. But nonetheless, these types of items are the types that I have experience with and that I deal with clients and customers with. So this list that I've got together here is pretty much me, except for the very last one. I'm also kind of assuming that you're familiar with web apps, Azure Functions, possibly, not necessary, Azure Container Instances, and Kubernetes services. You may or may not belong to any of these except for at least one or two, hopefully. If you don't fit on this list, or maybe you're just the last one here and you're just really good at staying up to date, so you're spending your evening attending meetups and learning the new stuff. If so, I definitely commend you because I'm lousy at that, and I wish I could do that. So hopefully you're still here. We still have, actually, we've got a few extra people. So that's who this presentation is geared towards. Someone who said yes or falls into one of those categories. Now, as I go through this talk, I want you to keep in mind a few questions because we're evaluating the preview product here and we're trying to get an understanding of what it does and whether or not it's worth you to continue to look at and all of that stuff. So, things to think about. Is Container Apps going to be a good fit for the type of workloads that you have? If you're not running things in containers currently, maybe it will fit it some future growth going down the road. So keep that in mind. It does have to run in a container. So that is one big gotcha, something that would keep you from using it. And right now, as it is with preview, it's got to be a Linux container. So that is definitely a roadblock if you're doing Windows containers currently. I wouldn't expect that would always be the case, but that's a current limitation. Given the current features that we'll look at in the preview service, think about, should you start looking at it now and continue as it grows into a fully baked product, or should you just wait a little bit and come back? So hopefully you'll get an answer to these questions in this presentation. One of the things that I've picked up as I was learning this was, can you think of a POC project where this would actually fit in your scenarios? And that's something that I've come up with, and I've started diving into. Okay, well, how can I do that? What pieces do I need? So if you can think of a POC project, that might be a good thing to keep in mind as well. And what are some of the pieces that you might need to learn a bit more to get the most out of it? And I've definitely got a few areas that I'm looking into. And as I go through this, you might actually find some red flags that's going to keep you from using it anytime shortly. So these are some good questions to keep in mind. And, given time, I'll revisit my answers to these questions at the end of the talk. And as I go through the presentation, please feel free to interrupt. I will put the chat on this window so I can check and see if there are any questions. You could feel free to drop them in the chat or just get off the mic and talk to me. Or I should say, get on the mic and talk to me. So this is the agenda. So full disclosure, I have been paying attention to container apps for a while, since it was announced, actually. I thought it was a pretty interesting announcement. I had heard about the project before it was public, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't pay much attention to it. And then once they announced it and really fully described where they were going with it, I started paying attention to it. But I have only been playing with it for the last couple of weeks. So I've only got a couple hands-on weeks under my belt. So I'm not totally experienced in this, and I'm new in evaluating this as well. So I've got your typical intro level presentation agenda here. So if anyone has questions as we go through this and get into the demos, the code, the CLR, or not the CLR, CLI, let me know and we can totally take this off track. But I will try to cover these items this evening before we get out of here. We'll talk about what it is. We'll compare it to some other Azure services. The examples that they've introduced as it being suitable for. Some of the concepts that are specific to container apps, its features as it currently stands, what KEDA and Dapr is, and how you would interact with those. I guess not really how you would interact them, how they would be used or useful in container apps. And deployment options, I mean, how are you get it out there? Actually, it's not that complicated since it's containers, but um, something also to pay attention to is the pricing and preview. Well, the preview quotas, I should say. Since it's in preview, they've limited some of the extents that you can use it, which is interesting. I guess they don't want you to do too much Bitcoin mining, I guess. But I'll go over that at the end, and then we can kind of discuss the pros and cons to serverless models. So what is it? What is Azure Container Apps? Or I've heard it called ACA. I've heard it called ACA. I will most likely be referring to it as Container Apps. It just rolls off my tongue a little easier. So the marketing page has this statement: fully managed serverless container service for building and deploying modern apps at scale. So that's pretty full of keywords, I guess. But to me, my simple definition, because I'm a simple guy, is it is an easy place to run your containerized apps. Full stop. Plus, it makes using a couple of the cloud native extensions easy, which are Dapr and KEDA. And we'll get more into that. By the way, it runs on Kubernetes and it uses Envoy for a proxy, or it could. You don't have to choose an external egress, but those are both things you're probably familiar with. If you're familiar with the cloud native landscape, everyone I'm sure has heard of Kubernetes. Envoy you may or may not have heard. But the reality is you don't need to know what it's using under the covers. Like you do with web apps, you don't need to know how it's all stitched together under the covers. It could be running on Service Fabric. It could be running on IIS. It doesn't really matter. You use web apps to run web apps. So that's sort of the way that I'm thinking of container apps. Is it runs containers. The KEDA and Dapr are really good with Kubernetes, but it shouldn't be relevant that it's running on Kubernetes because you can't control what version it's using or any of that stuff at the moment. So just got a comparison to a few of the other services in Azure that you can run containers with, or on, I should say. Azure App Services, which is great for websites. I mean, it was actually originally websites, I think. It's something that you, I believe, I'm not sure about functions, but you can run multiple containers in each of these. But the thing is, though, they're going to have the same life cycle. So if you have a web app that's running multiple containers and you roll out a new web app, well, you've got to roll out the new container at the same time. Of course, you wouldn't have to put a brand new tag on the container, but the container life cycle is kind of singular in this first column. Apps, app services, functions, container instances, they're geared towards doing one thing. So a function is geared towards to do specific things. App services geared to run a web app, and the container instance is the container as a service idea. So run a container or run these containers. Like a container with a sidecar might be a container group, but it's geared towards running a container, something you might do in Docker. You don't need an orchestrator for. So the level goes up whenever you want different life cycles. So say you have microservices and you have a website an order service and a customer service, a login service, report service. So you have all of these services that may not necessarily want to be the same lifecycle. You want to add a new report, you only need to update the report service. You don't need to update the login service because the login scenario hasn't changed. So that's the beauty of microservices and the ability to rev just that thing that you're changing versus changing every layer in the application for the monolith scenario and then rolling pushing the whole thing out and having to make sure that you do your regression testings on the whole application. So Azure Kubernetes Service really shines in that light because it can handle tons of services really well. And I'm putting Azure Container Apps in the same scenario. So it's going to handle your microservices or groups of logic. I mean, if they're a background process or whatever, they can all run separately. They don't have to be versioned at the same time. So that's kind of my comparison of the Azure services to container apps for running containers. It's going to be different. So if you look at Kubernetes service or AKS, you wouldn't want to go down the road to AKS if you really only had like 5 containers that you wanted to run. But if you had, say, 20 containers, well, then now you're talking. That makes a bit more sense. Granted, you have the Kubernetes skill set and the ability to get it running, but you wouldn't want, there's a certain bar there where you wouldn't want to bite off more than you could chew when it comes to a service. Container apps seems to be the sweet spot where you could start off with app services, but now that you've got a few microservices, well, now let's go to container apps, and then you might be able to grow very large before you need to go the Kubernetes route. And maybe you would get to the point where you don't even need to go to the Kubernetes service. There are some questions along the line of cost and how all that shakes out since it's preview. That stuff still, hasn't settled yet. Dust is still pretty cloudy. There are a few other services. I mentioned one down here, the Red Hat OpenShift in Azure. It will also do the same thing as the AKS, but I don't know hardly anything about it. I do know it exists, and I have a general sense of what it does, but I did mention it because I can't really speak to it. So any questions yet? Does that really set the landscape of where it fits in for a product for running containers at the moment for you guys? All right, I will take silence as a good thing. Good so far. All right, cool. So example scenarios, there are a few mentioned in the docs, or there are 4 mentioned in the docs, and I've added one where I really see the sweet spot for me for some customer projects that I have. And I'll speak more to that, and I'll actually show you some demos along this scenario that I'm looking at. So microservices, of course, anything built on Kubernetes, they're going to throw that bucket in there. Microservices is great for anything run on Kubernetes, as long as it can fit in a container. So the next 2 are kind of the same thing, same fruit, I guess. Event-driven processing or background processing. Basically, the difference is background processing could just be a worker that's running 24/7, where event-driven or schedule-driven, like a cron job or something along those lines, would run well in here, except for the cron job part. Right now, they don't have the ability to do a cron job. If you had an external service that would call your service on a schedule, then it would work fine. But it needs an event right now to do the processing. And it wouldn't surprise me if they did work in cron processing in the future, especially they're using Kubernetes under the covers. Why not? It's available on the native side there. Public API endpoints, they've kind of broken this out. Public API endpoints, well, that's a mouthful, could actually fit in microservices, but they've called it out because they have, since they're using Envoy as the proxy to get in and out of the cluster, if you will, they can do traffic splitting relatively easy. So that's why they've called out the public API endpoints. Since you can do traffic splitting, well, then you can do 80% of this one, 20% of that one. I myself have only found that scenario useful in one scenario, which is where we push something out. We don't want any traffic going to it, but we need to hit it for testing. And we need a specific URL so that we can test it before any traffic's going to it. And then we're ready to switch it over to 100 and 0 versus 80/20. I've never gotten to the point to where I would do 80/20 or any testing like that. But that's everybody's got their own environments and reasons to do what they do. But the plus one that I want to mention is the monolith web application that's in the process of being refactored to microservices. So the example I have is an old MVC web application. It's not .NET Core. The idea, of course, is we'll get it to .NET Core, but it's a layered application, the way we used to write things before microservices. It's got a data layer, it's got a business object layer, it's got the UI layer. It's factored pretty well for the time that it was designed, but it's not written in microservices. So if we need to change one thing or add one report, well, then we've got to change the code and push the whole thing out, which is just the way it was back in the day. So the idea is we want to start, especially new features, writing those in .NET Core, of course, and breaking them out into microservices so we can version them separately and slowly move the existing code into microservices. And then, swap the old one out for the new one eventually, but it's going to take some time to get there. It's like changing tires on a moving car, right? So that's the fourth scenario that they don't point out, is the kind of the scenario before you would even get to these. Yeah. So and I mentioned what my example is there. So let's take a look at it to begin with, and we'll just get portal over here. So the easiest way to find it is to go to the portal and say container apps. Container comes up as this nice little purple logo. Don't have any in this subscription. I had to create container app. Let's choose this guy. I have a resource group to stick them in. Let's call it J. Haley Aka 1. There's this concept that we'll get a little more into next of an environment. So I want to create an app, but to have an app running, I need an environment. So let's say J. Haley. We'll put it in East US 2. So this level actually has a location. Monitoring. Now, monitoring is log analytics. So I want to need a log analytics workspace. So let's say JLAW1. So we'll create that guy, or we'll have it created. Networking. So networking, I'm just doing a quick demo here, but I'll show you, you could choose an existing network, and with this subscription, I don't have any VNet set up. If you choose a network, you have to choose two subnets, one for the control plane. Think the AKS cluster underneath. Apps would be your container apps running, so it would be your apps. So one's like the management control plane, and the other is where your apps are going to run. So you need two subnets. Then you can choose internal or external. So the internal would allow you to do VNet only communication, where the external will allow you to expose it externally. But I'm just doing a demo right now, so let's hit create on this. So this is back to the app. That was all about creating the environment, and then now we're back to the app. So let's choose some other settings. I'm going to go with this demo, but if I didn't, so they have this specifically for us who are playing around with it, get one up and running quick. They've gotten smart and started adding that stuff, make it easy on us. You could choose another container from ACR or Docker Hub or some other registry. And then choose the image. It does have to be a Linux image, Linux-based image. And you can choose your CPU memory. You get a few different flavors here. We can talk about that, but ingress, do you want it to be available on a HTTPS endpoint right away or not? We'll do this quick start, and it will do ingress, port 80. This port number is for what the container's listening on, or exposing, I should say, and the container that they've provided for the quick start is an 80. So it's going to be exposed on 443, but the container's on 80. So let's just go to the next. Let's just do review and create. As this is creating, let me go back to the slides because it takes about 3 minutes, I think. That's how long it's been taken today. So while that's baking, a cooking show here. Let me go over some of the concepts that we just saw. So the concepts for how, and this image shows a lot more than the setup that I just did. So you've got the environment that everything's being contained in. The way I've envisioned this on the back end is like a Kubernetes cluster. Don't know if that's really how it's implemented, but this is how I envision it. And then everything that you're going to create, all these container apps, are going to be running inside of the environment. The unique thing they do expose is this thing called revisions. So you have your container app, say order service. So this is an order service, and you have version 1 of your order service going out. So you have revision 1 here, and it's got they call it a pod. It maps to what you would think of as a pod in Kubernetes, but um, really for container apps, you don't need to know anything about that. You've got this revision that is your containers that's running. So you've got your order service, and you make a change to your order service. Now you get revision 2. And they keep a certain number of revisions around. They don't have to be active. You can have multiples active and split traffic if you choose to do so, or you can just have one active or any flavor in between. But they do keep around a history, which allows you to roll back quickly after you've rolled one out, or you can do your traffic split and all that stuff. So they have this idea of keeping around multiple revisions. And that's pretty much it. It's not all that complicated. You got your containers that you've grouped together. Best scenario or best comparison is a microservice. We've got an order service. Maybe it has some side containers to do logging or monitoring, and then you want to version that as a unit, and that's sort of how the concepts in container apps work. So let's go back to the, can find it. All right, so it's ready. Let's go to the resource. Okay, so we get this URL. So we are now at the container app level. This isn't the container environment. This is container app. I can go to the container environment by clicking on the link here, navigating to it. We only have one app. So if we had multiple services, there would be one app per service. There's not much else here. One thing that as you play around with container apps and get really diving into it, you'll probably find this interesting is you go to the export template, and then you can see how this environment that you're looking at is set up for the ARM template. This is useful when you're troubleshooting stuff, especially when you get into the VNET integration, to see the settings that have been set up, because you might be able to get it running in the portal, but not via the command line or a bicep template. So, being able to get to how it's actually running is pretty useful when you're just learning this stuff, or I find it useful. All right, so hopefully this comes back. So let's go back to the app. You can see here's the application URL. And so if I click on this, all right, so it pops up. This is our container app. It is and let me copy this.
Jason, before you
Yes.
move forward too far,
Yes,
how do you save your quick start image? I'm not sure if I missed it or I don't know.
how did I save it, or how did I pick it?
How did you save it?
Okay, so it was just a checkbox. They defaulted all of that for me. They decided what container registry it's come from, what the name of the container was. It was just a checkbox, and I click save on the create container app.
So it's not your custom quick start image, it was
Oh,
pre-built.
yep, yep. And they've put it in the portal, so it's really quick and easy for you to get up and running. Actually, if you go to, I believe this is it. So if you go to, this is the documentation or the doc site, and I've got this link at the end of the presentation. Sorry, I've got an animation I'm going to hide here. So if you go to the CLI, so let me show you where I was. So I'm at the overview. This is the landing page of the documentation. Under quick starts, if you go to the portal, this is pretty much what I just walked through. And if you go to the CLI, it's the same thing. They've got they actually have the container spelled out for you in the portal or in the script here. So this is a script that it defaulted to. It defaults to all this stuff, but they've done a really good job on the quick starts and the how-to guides where you can just copy and paste these pretty easily. There are a couple that I ran into and had some errors, but that actually ended up being a bash issue, not their script issue. I can mention that later, but these scripts are really useful to get it up and going and learning the different parts of container apps. But yeah, it was just a checkbox I chose. I didn't have to really do anything.
Thank you.
So yeah, any other questions? Cool. Sorry, I didn't see the question come up. Yeah, so that's this URL. So that's the URL for the container app. But like we learned, there can be multiple revisions of that same container app. So you could have, version of 1 of order service and version 2 of order service. And you manage those through the revision management. I'll get to the other stuff. Actually, another demo, I'll be able to actually show you more detail. The secrets, ingress, and continuous deployment I won't get to because it's GitHub Actions. I'm going to show Azure DevOps instead. So this is a list of where all the revisions would be. I only have one. We could create a new one. So let's create a new one. So I'm not going to give it a suffix. It's based on this one. Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and create it. So I'm going to create another revision of the same container app, really containing the same thing. Same container, same everything. Should be up and running soon. As this comes up, let me show you a little bit of the UI. If there were any inactive revisions, by checking this box, they would just show. Since I don't have any inactive, now if I refresh this, there'll be 2. So we have 2, and this is where you can do the traffic splitting. So you could say 50-50 and click save, and it would do 50-50 across the 2 revisions that I have. But the cool thing is there 0 traffic's going to this revision now because I just put it out there. Actually, this is the older one. By default, the revision mode. So the revision mode, you have 2 options, multiple and single. If you do single, there's only ever going to be 1 active at a time. If there are multiples, then there's going to be 2 active, but the latest one gets 100% of the traffic unless you tell it specifically how much traffic to get. Or that's my experience. I could be wrong that happens all the time, but that's my experience. And so this is the old one. If I still want to do some testing on this one, even though if someone's hitting my URL that we saw here, they would be getting the brand new one. But say I want to still do some stuff on the old one. I go into this revision, and here's the URL specifically for that revision. So if I click on this, that's only that revision. That is not the new revision. So it won't do any load balancing if it's 0 on the, or yeah, the traffic won't be going to it. See, 0% of the traffic's going to it, but I can still navigate to it. And there's still 1 replica running. So if you have some scaling rules set and you end up multiple replicas running, you'd be able to see what number of replicas you have running on this screen. And this is the revision. You can kind of get buried in these screens because there's so many levels. It's nice that they've hidden the environment, or at least kind of put it off to the side, because you've got the app level, you've got the revision level, and then you've got the individual levels of each revision. So a little navigation here, you can get information about this specific revision running, see, there's really not a lot of information. I mean, that's also some of the great things about containers is there's not a lot that you can customize. What's running, where is it running, how much resources it has. That's pretty much it for this. I don't have any environments variable set, no secrets or anything like that. Scaling, we'll get more into this later, but if you wanted to set any scaling rules, there's another blade that would, or yeah, another blade that would show you where it's at. And if you have Dapr turned on, this is where you would see your Dapr components configured and all that stuff. So that's a quick overview of the portal. Actually, there's one other thing we missed was logs. So logs goes to log analytics, as you saw when I was setting it up. So let's see what was output for this environment as we were doing it. Okay, so this is a question I asked earlier on Discord. So I'm querying all logs on this, and there's nothing coming back yet. So we'll have to check it a little later. They said that they ship logs within seconds, but log analytics could take a few minutes before you actually get it. So we'll check back on it later and see if they show up. Can you set custom DNS name and TLS certificate? Oh, that's what I was going to show. So the short answer currently is no. Not in container apps. So the question, I don't know if I repeat the question. The question is, can you set custom DNS name and TLS certificate? And let me show you, I opened up Firefox for this here. So this is the container app in Firefox. And I wanted Firefox because it's the dev Firefox and I can show you the certificate info. So it wires up HTTPS for you, which is nice. However, it's going to be a, let's see, how do I get to the more information? Okay, here we go. The screen, security, view certificate. So here's a certificate that it's wiring up. So it's going to be a wildcard certificate, just like if it compares to web apps for me. I mean, I may be missing something technical on this, but it compares to, you having a web apps off of the .NET URL that web apps gives you. It's HTTPS, but it's a wildcard. And that URL is coming out. I do believe they are working on solving our networking problems, but they're not the highest priority. So I have a good confidence that they know what we need network to do, especially if you can do it with web apps. You're most likely going to need to do it with anything running in container apps, but they're not there yet. Not with the preview functionality. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yes, thanks.
All right, cool. So where are environment variables set up? So environment variables can be added to, you can do that with the command line, or you can do that. Let's go back to here. Okay, let's try to do another one. I don't know if you can, I've not tried to do environment variables in the UI, but let's try it in the edit mode. So one thing I didn't show when I was diving down in the divisions here. So if you go to a revision, you can edit here. There is a JSON view. All right, so you can't do the environment variables here. So let's go back. Okay, here we go, JSON view. Here we go. So here's the JSON view, but it doesn't give you the chance to edit it. If there were any environment variables, they would be in this section under the template. So I'm not sure if you can do it in the UI currently. You might have to do it via script, either with the command. The CLI may not even expose it yet. We can look at the help a little later. You can definitely do it with the bicep template and the arm template, but I'm not sure about portal yet. Explore that a little later. Okay, so that's the concepts. So the features that are there currently. You can run multiple containers, obviously, and multiple versions of your apps. So you've got the multiple container versions, which you also have the splitting traffic, which is useful if you want to do that 80-20 rule. You can auto scale. So they do have two scalars stuck in the box, HTTP. So you can say whenever you get so many concurrent HTTP requests, scale it. Or you can do it with an Azure queue, or you can go out to KEDA and do the 30 some odd scalars that KEDA uses. I can touch on this, but for those of you familiar with Kubernetes, you've most likely done something with the horizontal pod scaler, and you may or may not have done anything with the vertical pod scaler, but there's no idea of a vertical scaler in container apps. So if, and those are useful in the scenario where you've got a service that you didn't quite know how much memory it needed, and it keeps hitting the memory and killing itself. That's where the vertical pod autoscaler comes into play, because it can restart it with more resources after it gets killed. But there's no such thing in the container apps yet, so you kind of have to know how many resources you're going to need to have an idea to set those resources. The auto scaling that it does right now is completely horizontal. It'll stamp out multiple replicas given specific rules that you give it. The enable HTTP ingress, that's cool, but they definitely, as Jim pointed out, still have some features they need to add on before it's going to be useful in prod. Internal ingress, and they have the service discovery, which I've got a link in here, which is similar to Kubernetes type thing, where you can discover your services off of the URL or FQDN. Really, the way that you're going to want to do it is use Dapr, but that's topic comes a little later. You can build microservices with Dapr, super easy. You don't have to worry about installing it. You just check a box and it takes care of it for you. So you have to know how to use it, and that's where I'm at. Run containers from any registry, which makes sense. You could do it from GitHub and ACR out of the box, or you've got your ability to put the credentials in there for another one. Use Azure CLI extension or ARM and Bicep templates. Provide an existing VNET. That one's got some glitches in it today. They're working on getting those fixed, but you can surround it in your own VNet, which is super, super useful, especially if you're going to do microservices. You don't want those available in some other VNet, though they do get wrapped in a VNet, and you can control the ingress. So it's not total, but you are most likely going to want to put it in your VNet, not some other network. Manage application secrets. I changed the wording on here from what they had on their site because they're not. It said something like secure something secrets, and they're not securing it. It's just base 64 encoded like with Kubernetes, which it's just an application secret. They're most likely going to really build that feature set out. I couldn't see them going to production, or at least much past version 1, without fixing something so that you can get it out of the key vault. But right now it's like a Kubernetes secret. It's base 64 encoded, which I'll show you an example soon. And you can view application logs, which we saw in the analytics logs. Any questions out there before I dive into a more detailed demo? No, cool. Okay. Jeff, did you have a question?
I was going to ask, is managed identity supported?
Not yet, but it is on the short list. So it will be coming soon. So
okay, thank you.
That's the other thing, is there's so many things they know they need to add, it just aren't there yet. So the team's working hard on it. So this next demo is me diving into what I find relevant for the service as it is, even just the minimum features that they have currently. I can really see this, especially when it goes GA, I can really see this using this on my client projects. So I have, like I mentioned earlier, some client projects that are old MVC applications, and we want to start moving things to microservices and .NET Core and all this stuff. But our hands are tied because the car's moving. We can't change the tires so easy without stopping it. So this is the avenue that I'm looking. So what I have is I have a web application that, let me just go to the resources here. So this is the resources. So the majority of these items, besides the website stuff or the web application stuff, the VNet, the container app, the log analytics, the private DNS, these were all created from the scripts on the Quick Start site or the documentation site. Just followed those. I did have some problems with wiring up the VNet to an existing VNet. They gave me the scripts to create the VNet. The only thing I had to do is I added an additional subnet for the web app to be integrated with, because the web app likes to have its own subnet too. So I had to add a subnet for that. But other than that, it allows me to connect my web app to the container app via the VNet integration so that it doesn't go outside in a public virtual network. So this is a web app, not too exciting for this talk. I can show you what it looks like. It's right here. Well, the home page is here. Template right out of the box. But what I have is I have this orders controller that calls the container app over HTTP clients, going over the VNet to container apps, and then it returns this list. And if I keep hitting it, you can see the GUIDs change and the times change. So not all that exciting, but it kind of proves the point. So let me show you the integration part. So if you go to the networking, which I can never find, network. So networking, I've got the VNet integration turned on. It's pretty much just configured. Well, it's configured now. Due to some issues that they were having earlier today, I didn't want to do this from scratch because it wasn't working. The integrated VNet stuff wasn't working with container apps. So if you've ever done VNet integration with a web app, it's pretty much, I should have brought one up to show you. It's pretty much you choose the VNet and you choose the subnet. If you don't have a subnet, then you create a subnet to have your web application connect to your virtual network via that subnet. And that's all this is doing. This is just mapping this VNet, which I'll show you the container apps is also in. It's just the web app is using its own subdomain. So if I go to the VNet, I can actually show you the VNet. So this is the VNet resource, which ignore the man behind the curtain here. Subnets. So the control plane, that's one of the items that's in a script on the documentation page. Applications, that's also scripted on the application or on the documentation page. I was playing around with the subnet gateway, the VNet gateway, and I haven't got that one all working yet. And then I added the web app to map to my web. So that's the integration part of the web app. Any questions at that point? Oh, cool. All right, so that's all that's really interested on the web app side. So now if I go to the environment, so this is the container and apps environment. Again, I jumped into the environment level, not the app level, just because I was in the resource group listing. But I wanted to show you this. The static IP address for this environment app is an internal IP address, which is kind of important if you want to make sure that you're going over the internet or the VNet. So let me see if I can pull this guy back up. Yep, nope, let's try that one. This one. So if I go back to the environment on this one, environment, we'll see it's a public IP address. So this is a public IP address. So that's one key difference. I've got the private IP address on the one that's here, and the other one is a public IP address. And it tells me the two different subnets that it's configured to use, and I could go to them. So now I look up my apps, and it's just an app that I call the OR API. And this is where you could see more of the features here. So this is all the same. We've got our URL, nothing exciting there because you can't hit it publicly. So if I go to this one, it's not going to do anything. If I try to hit it with Fiddler, same thing. I'll get an error back because it's not publicly exposed. So now if I go to, I don't think it is. Let's try this. If it is, well then, I've been wrong before. Yep. So the API is not publicly available, which is good. That's kind of the point of this demo. So secrets. So this does have a secret, and it's the secret to my my ACR, my container registry, where my orders API application code is. The ingress is configured slightly different. I do have ingress enabled because I want to expose the HTTP endpoint to my virtual network, but I want to limit traffic to my virtual network. And my container exposes 80 as well. I didn't do continuous integration through this. If we look at revision management, I have this one set up slightly different. I have it set up for the single active revision. And if you look at this, you'll see there's several other revisions that I have been playing with. So there's just one active item. That's pretty much all that's interesting on this side. So any questions on that? So that's the web app calling the container app over a virtual network, which is something I was really aiming to get. That will help me solve some customer problems. Okay, so no questions. Cool. And I will show you the DevOps portion of this soon. So demo is good. KEDA and Dapr. So this one, I really did want to do a demo of this, but I couldn't do it justice. KEDA I do have experience with. I've used it quite a bit in AKS. It gives you the ability to scale. The ways that I've used it mainly is queue scaling. So when work goes into a queue and the queue reaches a certain point, then workers spin up and scale out. And then once the work's done, it scales back in. Works out really well. Dapr, actually, let me go to the site here so I can show you, teach you to fish here. So this is the KEDA site. It has the concept of scalers. It's basically an abstraction of scaling providers. How do you want your scaling of your individual container app to be controlled? And the experience that I have is with the Azure queue, storage queue. So I've used this one quite a bit. So whenever something hits a queue, that's when I want a pod to spin up and do some work. Or whenever it hits, more than 5, then spin up another one. Actually, when it hits 10, spin up another one. So that's how I've used KEDA. It's abstracted away how your application your application code can be horizontally scaled. There are two types of scaling in KEDA. One's a scaling object, and one's a scalar or scaling job. I believe that's it. Scaling or scalar. Scaling job. I could have it wrong. No, scaled job. So there's scaled job and then there's scaled object. So that's the different versions. They don't have scaled object implemented yet. It's just scaled object. So scaled job isn't there. The differences are a scaled object is like a service. So when say my order service receives 500 requests, I want it to scale out a lot of order services so they can process that. And then once the number gets down, I want it to go back to maybe only one version. But a scaled job would be you want something to start up, and when it completes, it goes away. So that's two different flavors of sort of the same thing, but they are different. The scaled object, which is more service oriented, is the one that's currently there. We have a question. The Microsoft Advocate team I mentioned earlier, their team runs an IT ops team. Okay, so we've got some links. All right, cool. Thanks, Andrew. All right, so the presentation, the Dapr one. Okay, so first off, before I jump off of KEDA, KEDA has their help on a Slack channel, which is over here, off of Kubernetes. So if you go to Kubernetes, KEDA, this is their Slack channel. So if you're banging your head against the wall and you cannot get KEDA figured out, you can ask questions on the Slack channel. You have to go to the Kubernetes Slack and then add the KEDA channel. They also have and I'll mention this one later, An Azure Container Apps has a Discord server, and then they also have a channel specifically for KEDA. So if you're doing Azure Container Apps and have a specific question towards KEDA, you might want to ask it here first. But that's two ways to get help on KEDA, besides, of course, the documentation. And there's some samples linked off of the documentation. So Dapr, and Michael could help me on this. It is, I believe it started, or I'm sorry, Mark could probably help me on this. I believe it started out as Service Fabric Mesh and then was refactored to Dapr. So
They actually started it from scratch.
okay. Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Service Fabric Mesh was a whole massive Service Fabric thing designed to run containers.
Okay. Okay. I'm wrong on that. So this has a lot of features that you can use to integrate a microservice, especially microservices, like service invocation. So you could call an endpoint on one of the other services, pub sub. That's often a need whenever you're doing microservices, because there's just always asynchronous connections there. Secret management. I don't know what input-output binding is, so I can't really talk to that. State management is the abstraction of a state store. It makes it easy for you to save stuff in your application, and then you can swap out state stores relatively easy if you need to do so for different environments. And virtual actors, I don't know much about either. So Dapr is one of those things I've been looking to dive into. I just haven't been able to find a reason to do so. So Container Apps is going to give me the ability to do that. For Dapr help, as I shown here, they have a Dapr channel in Container Apps, but there's also a Dapr server. They have a Discord server as well instead of Slack. So that's two ways to get help on Dapr related questions. So we're doing on time, 7:10. So let me, let me go back to I just want to show you the Dapr. Actually, I'm not going to be able to do that. Yeah, I'm not. Show you this. So this.
You can do a whole other session on Dapr.
Oh yeah, definitely. I just don't think.
Let me know if you want to collaborate on that.
Oh, absolutely. I've got so much to learn on Dapr. Anyways, it's not available when you go to edit a revision to change it. Yeah, so I can show you some code soon. But I don't have a demo of Dapr up and running because I just don't know enough about it. So deployment options currently to get container apps out and running for you. The portal, you saw that, relatively easy to do. I don't know that you can do environment variables like Irene asked for. The CLI, the CLI demo code on the documentation for container apps is really good. It really shows you pretty much everything you would need, but let me show you, since it's still in preview, the command isn't on, or I haven't been able to find it on the documentation site. So it's AZ container app, not container space app, it's container app, all one word. So if you type that, oh yeah, hold on, let me show you this first. You can start navigating the help, but you'll have to install something first. So if you go to the overview, so this is the documentation site, and again, this is going to be at the end of the presentation. You'll need to install the extension. So this is the extension for the CLI. If you do PowerShell, if you're into that sort of thing, you can try the PowerShell flavor. I haven't tried PowerShell, honestly. And then you have to add the provider or register the provider, I guess. You do these two things, then you get the container app available to do these things that I'm getting ready to show you. So the container app help, that's the high level stuff. If you want to do anything with creating an environment or updating an environment, you would need to look at the ENV. So you can just navigate the help documentation they have already built in pretty much by just doing the -h and reading it. They've got pretty much the documentation here. It's just not on the website, or not, I haven't been able to find it on the website. The other app is this one. So like if I say, I have any available, I bet I'd see. Okay, so I do have one. Okay, so this is my sample one, and I've got the table output by default, or otherwise you'd see a bunch of JSON. But you could do a lot of other things to, you know, create, delete, list, scale. So let's take a look at scale. So this is what you could do to set the scaling of a container app, because this is at the container app level, not the environment level. So you can basically navigate around what you need to create. So let me show you create. So if I go here, create, and like I mentioned, the docs site's really good. See, they give you quite a few demos here as examples of what to do. So they're definitely building this out. It's not too difficult to figure out. So that's the CLI, ARM and Bicep. So let me show you some code, and then I will mention where this came from towards the end. Let me find this. Not bore you with my directory structure. Back up. Others. Okay, so here. So I have two directories. Let me open this in code. Of videos that I found, and I have a watch list of 25 different videos of Azure Container Apps that I will show you the link at the end so you can see those. Two of them, one of them was in the MS Reactor, and that was just a week or two ago. This is the sample code from their talk. Let's see, they didn't, I don't believe he did the bicep. Let's see. What I'm looking for is some bicep code. I believe it's Think Texture that did the bicep code. So if I look at the multiple container, this is an example that actually uses Dapr. So if I look at the bicep, this is pretty useful. So this is going to be the DevOps. This is where I pretty much learned how to do the bicep code for the DevOps demo that I will show you in a second. So see, here's the Dapr tie-in. It's just metadata. Pretty much, he's got some really good factored bicep templates. He's done a really good job on these. But nonetheless, I will give you some more information on this so that you can watch the video to see this sample code. He does 3 good demos, and it's really good bicep code, which is pretty useful for container apps these days, or pretty much anything. So let me show you the DevOps. So the web app, and I recognize that DevOps is kind of old school these days, which is okay, because, you know, as I mentioned, my example or my POC is an old MVC application that does do deployment via DevOps. So the question is, how can I work this into the same pipelines that we already have? So what I'm going to do is I want to bring up the code. I don't think it's open. That is all right. So if I can find it. All right. So here's Visual Studio. So I will talk to this later. This is the controller. So this is the web controller. All it's doing is it's grabbing a URL out of the config, and then it's going to make an HTTP client call across to the web API, which is via the VNET integration, come back with a list, and then display it on the UI. The web API is just this dumb list that shows you the machine name and just an order with some timestamps get added whenever I create the order. So let me change it. It's currently doing 15, so let's change it to 2. So it's very obvious that we've got new code here. So I'm just going to check this in and push. So this takes about 3 minutes to work through the pipelines. So let me show you the pipelines. Okay, so pipelines. And I do have it broken apart. It is a YAML pipeline on this end, but so this is the order API. So it's got the what is it? Continuous integration turned on. So it will kick off whenever I check something in, because I've got it watching the order API path of the source code. This is the so all it's doing is it's building the Docker image, publishing the Docker image, and then I'm moving over the bicep files that I have in this project so that the other side, the release side, can take that bicep file and push it out. It can be done differently, but I need that bicep file in the release so that I can push it out, because they don't have a task yet. Okay, so the build's done. Wait, hold on. That's not the wrong. That's the web. So the build is done. No, the build's going. Sorry, I was looking at releases. So the release is different. The release is the old school UI. It's not a YAML. So all I'm doing is I'm running an Azure CLI command. You could also do, instead of doing a bicep, you could do the AZ container app update and then do the command args that direction too. So that's another option. I chose to go with a bicep just so I could play around and bang my head against the wall with Azure Container. Yeah, with Azure DevOps for a while. So I'm passing in the registry secrets that go into the bicep template, and then have the whole thing just push out the new version. So the new tag is going to be the build ID. So there's a number on the end of my builds, and then that ID is going to be the tag on the new image. So that's the release. So now the release is kicking off because I've got it turned on to do the continuous deployment whenever the build gets done. So again, this is, kind of the automated flow that I'm used to with regular old applications, but this is pushing it out to a container app versus the website itself all going out at once. Now, the interesting point, and this is nice due to it being containers, and I'm not sure how this is going to work going down the road, but since I've got it running in my virtual network, I'm able to push from DevOps to container apps in my virtual network, and I'm not quite sure what's open there, and whether or not that's going to get closed in the future to tidy things up. But typically, if I've got something wrapped in a virtual network, I can't push it out to it. But this will come out in a second. Whenever I hit this, it will go. Okay, it's there. So now we have our 2 going out versus the 15 that was going out. So that's the new version of the API. If we go to our revisions management, this was pushed out at 21:15, or that's when it was created. Let's refresh. All right, so now we're at 0/20/15. So the other one, oops, sorry, just made it inactive. This one right here. So that was the previous one. So that pushed out our new image just by checking in the code and pushing stuff up there. Can you just do a rollback here if there was a problem? I could do a rollback by just turning the active back to the other. Hit save. So let's try that. Usually doesn't take too long to save. Look at that, we got some nice little error. 403, the web app is stopped. Is it back? Is it back? It's back. It's not back. Okay, so this was the provisioned. Okay, so now it's there. Huh. Well, that's not very seamless. I'll have to play with that one. So this is, oh, hey, this is weird. So now I have 0% traffic going there. I'm not sure how to do that. Try, oh, we'll go back to this one. This is something I haven't done. That's a good question. Okay, so now let's change 100%. these numbers do have to add up to 100. So let's save. Let's see if this does it. It's definitely not seamless. Wouldn't be an ideal scenario, but I guess rolling back never is. Okay, let's see. Cross our fingers. I had to figure that one out. I have to get back to you on that one. There's got to be a way to do it. There's got to be a way to do it. Roll back. It's a good question. Okay, I'll give it one more try here, and then that's it. Any other questions while we're playing with this failure? All right, so let's see. This isn't. That's weird. 403. The web app is stopped. Huh. Interesting. Is that my web app that's got the problem? I don't know. I won't spend any more time on this. There is a way to do it. I'll have to practice that one and I'll let you know. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason you can't roll back. The previous revision was there. Just need to figure out how to do it. It should be something that you could easily do on the command line as well, since that's all doable on the command line. Okay, so back to the slides here. Okay, so pricing. Now this is an interesting one, and I don't know if you can read this. Give me a little bit. So this is my problem with serverless. Is this small number to me is just, it just makes no sense. It's so small that it makes no sense to me. So I did some calculations just off of the ballpark. What if I had one CPU and I forget, maybe 1 gig running 24/7 for a month? What would that calculate out to? Just to give me an idea what these numbers mean. It would be nice if they would give you a monthly, but I get the idea that that's not what they're charging by here. But let me show you the calculations I came up with. So this is the calculations I came up with, and taking into account some bandwidth. So it's roughly the amount that would be an S1 for a web app running 24/7. Granted, there's no storage coming involved, but roughly the same as an S1. But the cool, well, I mean, and I've also highlighted, log analytics is another question. If you're sending a bunch of stuff to log analytics, it can get expensive. So that's another cost that is also a big, be black magic trying to figure out what that would cost. But predictive estimates for this is going to be practically impossible. You're going to have to try it out and see how it is, because you get a charge per request. I mean, granted, you get 2 million free, but there's a charge for request per million. I mean, that may or may not apply to you, the million wise, but you know, with these numbers being crazy small, it's difficult to predict. So that's just kind of a difficulty with per well, serverless, I guess they call it, pricing structure. Okay, so quotas for the current preview. For subscription, you can have 2 environments running. That's why I've been jumping between 2 subscriptions. I don't know if you noticed. One browser's one subscription and one's another. So you get 2 environments per subscription. You get 20 container apps per environment. You get 25 replicas per app, and then you can do 2 cores per replica, and then you can do 50 cores per environment. So this is kind of the big cap right there. But those are kind of enough for you to totally play around with it and try it out, see how it's working. But just keep that in mind. You need, if you have 1 subscription, you can really only do 2 environments. But if you have multiples, then you just have to worry about dealing with determining which subscription you're in. So some resources I have, and I'll make the slide deck available. These are the blog post. This one basically is the introduction of cloud apps. It was around the Ignite period, pretty descriptive of what they want it to be. The connected Microsoft, it's a little more information than what the previous one was. If you're interested in the whole VNET wrapping of container apps, this last one's going to be very interesting to you. And I see Jim's typing a question. Some additional resources. This is just the docs link that I found. It's a little shorter than the big one. GitHub issues are being so the issues for it are being tracked in GitHub. The code's not there, but you can see the issues that they're tracking. The Discord, so that was this one. They have a Discord server so that you can ask and also learn. So if you go to general, you can kind of, like here, I mentioned there was an issue earlier today. So we're investigating an issue with the environmental creation VNet enabled and we'll update soon. I mean, it's kind of cool to have some visibility into what's going on and a place to ask some questions. So Jim asked, what's the future of ACI? There is some overlap in functionality. They run containers. That's a, I don't know. I haven't asked anyone about that. So ACI is kind of a building block because there's stuff on the machine learning side. There's functions may actually use ACI to run its containers. I don't know. I'm probably wrong on that. There's definitely other things that use ACI, so I don't see it going away, but I can see its usefulness not being as useful if you have more than one container to run. It seems like Jeff Holland just answered this question for someone. I'll see if I can find it and post it. Let me write that down. But there's definitely pros and cons to each. If you're doing multiple containers, I wouldn't want to use ACI. But if you're just doing one container for like a Visual Studio agent to do building, and you just need that one container, you don't need a container environment with just one container app running, then I could totally see just using ACI. So I see a usefulness for it. The drawback to ACI is you need something on top of it to manage anything that requires multiple.
Right. Yeah, it's like Docker before Kubernetes.
Yeah, it's totally useful, and it's stuff that can be built on. But yeah, I mean, I see your point, Jim. If you're doing more than one, I don't know why you would use ACI.
Right. I don't think there's really, actually, I don't think there's overlap here because it's kind of like ACI is as bare bones as you can get from a container solution, and this is trying to get closer to a dev-friendly deployment platform.
True. Yeah, and if this is really deploying some sort of a cluster behind the scenes, it's definitely overkill for running something small and simple.
Yeah, but well, so let me give you the Microsoft perspective on that. We're here to make money. We are a profit-making organization. So tiny workload, we're not going to support a platform for tiny workloads. There has to be real consumption behind it for it to matter long term.
That makes sense. Now, this is the resource that I would recommend you take a look at. It's the list. It's the 25 videos on Azure Container instances container apps that I've found on YouTube. The sample code that I was showing you is this red one right here, the All Things Azure Containers. It was presented by Think Texture just last month. This Microsoft Reactor one was the other code that I jumped out of. It's also a very good one. It was just presented a couple weeks ago, the 16th or last week. So they're all very current. I mean, it had to be current since it was just announced in November. These three are good because they dive into pieces of the stuff. This one goes into a good Dapr demo, and this one actually uses Dapr too. Bicep, KEDA, and Dapr. He just didn't include it in the title. So these three are really good. Highly recommend those. Good content, some good diagrams to help you understand it. Yeah, this is a good intro as well. It's the Blaze. I forget what Blaze's last name is from Wintellect. He did a good overview. It was in November, so it was early after it was announced, but he did a good overview. So it might actually be a good one to like move underneath Jeff's. Oops.
By the way, for for Dapr in general, there was a DapperCon at the end of October, I think. Those sessions are worth watching, and there was a very good session that Donovan Brown and drawing a blank on her name right now, presented at KubeCon in early November. Very good sessions for it.
Yeah, was it? Yeah, anyways, I've started collecting Dapr videos, but I don't really have much there yet, so I haven't really posted that link. But this last link is the one I'm still working my way through those videos, but they're definitely informative. Some of them are more than intro, especially the ones that have sample code. And if you hunt out their GitHubs, I'm working on some blog postings for all the stuff that I've learned in the last 2 weeks digging into this stuff. And I'll include all of the GitHub repos and all the sample code that I've found useful from these presentations that I've found. You can do a little investigative research and find them yourself, but it's all out there. Not everything's tagging Azure Container Apps in GitHub. There are a few available, or easy to discover, but not everyone's using that yet.
But seriously, the value of container apps differentiates when you consider the Dapr plus KEDA plus Encore parts of the service. Without that, it's another container hosting option, and it's not as compelling. So I would definitely encourage everyone to focus on the application perspective on this service rather than the Kubernetes aspect of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the fact that they tell you it's running on Kubernetes and they tell you it uses Envoy really just doesn't matter. It's almost like when I worked for a startup in 2000 and we were using the Oracle database because that's what the venture capitalists wanted us to use. Oh, we use Oracle. It's like, well, okay, that's great. It's a database. And we got to get the app working before it matters what the heck it's running on. So the fact that they tell you it's KEDA and Envoy almost sounds like they're just trying to get more buzzwords because you're not using it to utilize their product.
So a little insight. So AKS is considered extremely complex to deal with. Even though it's less complex than doing bare metal Kubernetes, it's still complicated. And the idea behind Container App Service is to make Kubernetes much more approachable, largely by hiding it.
Yeah.
Right? So you can get the power of it, the benefits of it without having to deal with it, which, going back over some of the, the original cloud services story was amazing because as a developer, because you could just build your ASP.NET code and deploy it to a web role without dealing with the vagaries of maintaining and deploying a web role, a web server. So it's the same idea. Often when you look at why we do things, you need to flip it around and look at it from the perspective of our enterprise customers and what they've been complaining about. And that's what this is the first steps on solving that problem after we squash Service Fabric for no particular good reason.
Yeah, and I can.
But I'm not bitter.
I could totally see where this is going to really turn into a powerful service because, I mean, take what was websites before they turned into web apps, and then functions came off of that. I mean, everything that they've added to app service over the years and how useful web apps is now just to do something simple with a web app. You have all kinds of choices now. And I think they really are onto something here because, I mean, everyone's trying to abstract away Kubernetes. Everybody wants to push Kubernetes to the bottom and build on top of it and, just win because you've got this open source framework that you're working on instead of having to roll everything yourself. I mean, like the original web apps infrastructure. I was trying to find the diagram that I'd seen in a presentation.
While you're doing that, let me ask Andrew a question. Andrew, you're an ops guy, right?
Is he here? Yep, he's still here.
He's here, but he's muted. Did you forget to unmute?
He fell asleep. Sometimes I have that effect.
I said sort of. Okay. Yeah, because the really tricky thing of the way we build stuff is we are still very operations focused. And yet, on the other hand, we're trying to win the hearts and minds of developers. So if you look at that part of the story and you look at Kubernetes, those two things don't go together. So this is an attempt to do that. Unfortunately, what we're doing in this case is not really painting a clear picture, and we're leaving it up to all of you to figure out the value of it.
Well, sorry, were you going to say something, Andrew, before I jump in?
He's trying.
Yeah, I don't tend to touch this kind of tech myself. I tend to look after like the app support and the development teams. I don't tend to do it directly, but my job is sometimes like a middleman. So I might have to go to the app support or speak to the infrastructure team. But I work on different projects, so I'm more here to find out a little bit more about it, and then I can go ask and then understand it better. That's my main I guess position at the moment, but more to pick up what Jason can maybe share. I've asked a few questions already, but some of the developer guys, they were saying, well, what is this? They don't understand it. So I think what Jason was saying, like Kubernetes, maybe sort of similar but different, but where do you apply it?
No, you really want to deploy. It really is a place to deploy container-based microservice applications, which is why Dapr is in there, which is the distributed application programming runtime, something like that. Application runtime. So, distributed computing predates containers and all of these kind of things. All this science, computer science, goes back to the 70s, and this is trying to make it real. But it's being built by a company that only knows how to talk to ops people, which is why I called you out here.
Thank you.
And, the concerns that operations people have is very different. But to the point that you're trying to, if your people are coming to you and say, what is this? Tell them it's a really easy place for you to build a microservice application or a distributed application and deploy it here. So that's the one sentence answer for you to go back, or the elevator pitch, as we like to call it.
Cool, thank you.
The rest is details, okay?
Nice one, thanks. If there's like maybe some examples of you can do this with it, you can do that with it, and this is where you might use it and how you might go about it.
Well, find out if they know what a distributed application or a microservices application actually is. Have they read Building Microservices by Sam Newman? And then if they have, it'll probably be really obvious what you should do with it. And if they haven't, they'll have the same misperceptions about microservices that everybody does, in which case, call me.
How do you spell Sam Newman? Sorry.
N-E-W-M-A-N.
Cool.
Sam being his first name, yes.
Yeah.
He's from your side of the pond. He's from your side of the pond.
Cool. They probably know of some of them do like microservices for like that distributed computing and bits and pieces around that. It's just I'm trying to move more into like Azure, more Microsoft stack, but it's where I fit in. I don't know.
Yeah, this is more generic than that.
Right, cool.
If you think about the beauty of microservices in general, the technology that you use to build the microservice should be irrelevant.
Right. Okay.
And
except it's got to run on Linux right now.
Actually, so here I can do my usual controversial thing. I am actually pretty actively recommending that my clients don't use Windows Server for the back end anymore. If somebody tells me they're running Windows containers, my standard question is why? Okay, because Windows containers are not actually containers. And but no, I do not consider the fact that it only runs Linux containers at this point to be a shortcoming. Only old school Microsoft technology people do.
I can't run my MVC apps on it, man. I've got to run those outside.
Not your .NET framework ones, right? So flip them over to .NET 6 and move on.
I can't, dude. I can't.
What?
I can't. Not everything's supported. Just the way it is.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Still stuff running on COBOL, so it's not a new problem.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And then maybe you can't. Then maybe this isn't the platform for those apps.
No, but it's a great. So for me, it's a great place to start picking that old one apart and throwing it into core and putting it into. And it gives me a perfect place to run these containers, as opposed to, they would never pick up Kubernetes. I mean, so you start off with 2 services. Well, they're not gonna pay for Kubernetes running.
Who's they?
A customer of mine. They won't,
You sound like you've been drinking like I have.
I haven't yet. I just can't talk. Not yet, anyways.
Last year I couldn't spell engineer, now I are one.
Yeah, anyways, it's just the situation we want to start refactoring the site and picking things off and putting it into
Sure.
microservices, but it's not going to happen fast. And we can easily start doing two. We could break two off pretty easy. And then new stuff we can add into microservices. So before you know it, we're going to have, say, 3, 4 easy. But that doesn't you can't justify Kubernetes with 3 microservices.
You can with Container App Service.
Yeah, exactly. But that's Container App Service, not Kubernetes. But nonetheless, so back to the presentation. Did you guys keep in mind what the questions were, and did you answer your questions for yourself? So here are my questions. Like I do think it's relevant for my workloads, and I think right now is a great time to start because what I need it for, it already provides enough of to get a POC working. So I've got a POC, I've got the idea, the raw ideas down, but I need to start actually going down the path of implementing things. I do want to dig more into Dapr. It's going to be a little while. I've got to get one microservice out there before digging into Dapr is going to help me in that implementation. But I want to get familiar with Dapr, how to wire stuff together, where to use it, why to use it. KEDA I'm already familiar with, so I'm pretty comfortable there. Red flags that I see right now, just troubleshooting. There's not a lot of tools for you to troubleshoot. Logs are slow, so logs aren't there within a minute or two. So that can be totally frustrating if you're trying to troubleshoot something when it worked on your machine, but you put it out there and it's not. So troubleshooting can definitely use quite a bit of love. But anyone have any questions or answers to their questions or scenarios that they thought of that they want to bring forward?
I have a comment.
What's your comment?
Do your best to use it the way we built it to be used.
Well, how's that? Microservices?
Whatever things we've implemented, we've tried to hit like the 80-20 rule, which I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
Everything we do is 80-20 rule. So you want to try to stay with that. Enterprise customers in particular are get very much into the details, the nitty-gritty of doing things in a particular way. The give-get of cloud computing is we assume the burden for you, and you lose a little bit of control when you do that. So that's my guidance on this service, as it has been since the beginning. For if any of you around here have been listening to me for the last 10 years, so Jason's right. It's still a work in progress. Treat it as such, and our marketing is rough on this. We don't tout the value of having Dapr and KEDA and Envoy present. That is the primary value proposition as a developer for you to use and leverage that.
Sounds good, and I totally see a lot of potential with it. So I'm
Yes.
definitely going to dig into it. And with that, I will stop the recording. I guess